So what I'm going to talk about is applying the general theme of this conference about advocacy to what patients can do to help develop better diagnosis and eventually treatments and cures for our diseases. So before I begin, I'm going to give a little bit of background about myself. I first started having symptoms of muscle weakness about the time I graduated from high school in 1981. And my first weakness was that I had weakness in my lower legs. I couldn't stand on my toes. I saw several neurologists around the country. They didn't really know what to make of my symptoms. Finally, after several years, when I was in graduate school in about 1990, there was a neurologist at the University of Rochester who says, well, there's this condition that was discovered in Japan called Miyoshi myopathy that matches what you have very closely. So I'm going to write a paper about you and some other patients that I and my colleagues have found. A few years after that, someone started in Boston, started looking for the gene that caused Miyoshi. Simultaneously in the UK, a group started looking for the gene for a type of limb-girdle muscular dystrophy called LGMD 2B. They both discovered the same gene, which they named dysferlin. So I and other people who have Miyoshi or LGMD 2B or some other clinical presentations, we can all say that we have dysferlinopathy. Okay, so that raises the question of genetic diagnosis. Now, the first thing that happened after the gene was discovered, I wasn't one of the people in whom they initially found the genetic mutation, but they did develop a protein test. This very good neurologist in Rochester had taken a muscle biopsy, saved it in liquid nitrogen for later use, and then I was able to get that tested for the dysferlin protein, which sure enough was deficient. Then it was a few more years before I actually got the gene sequence and found my mutations. Okay, so it took a long time for me to get a proper diagnosis. People like Maduri and myself and others at the Jain Foundation, others at foundations who work on different forms of neuromuscular disease, want that to be much easier for everyone from now on. Okay, so many of us in this room either have a neuromuscular disease ourselves or are a family member of someone who has a neuromuscular disease. Neuromuscular diseases, whatever particular type you have a few things in common. They're rare diseases. There's actually a technical definition for rare diseases, which I won't go into here. With a few exceptions, there aren't approved treatments for that specific disease. And many patients either aren't properly diagnosed, and in the case of a genetic disease, a proper diagnosis means you have the gene sequence, you know your exact mutation. The reason for that is that some of the treatments that are being developed will only work for specific types of mutation. So you need to know if you have a mutation that treatment will work for. If you don't, then that treatment isn't for you. If it is, then it might be. So we need to make diagnosis more precise, faster, and better. Okay, so for patients with neuromuscular disease. What can we do to make things better? First and most importantly, get a genetic diagnosis. Also, and all of you who are here today are already doing this, get in touch with other patients. Form a network. That's very important. If there is a disease registry in your particular disease, get included on that registry. Spread awareness, reach out to other patients. Social media is a wonderful tool for doing that. I'll give a couple examples later. And once you're diagnosed, if there are clinical studies, initially just a natural history or biomarker study, as Catherine spoke of, or down the road, clinical trials, consider participating in them if you're able and meet the inclusion criteria. As an example of what the power of patient engagement can do, the Dysferlin Clinical Outcome Study is a clinical study which is looking for biomarkers and other readouts to tell, if we test a treatment down the road, what exactly are we going to look at to know whether the treatment is helping the patient or not. So to do that and to better understand the natural history of the disease, how symptoms vary between people, we need to observe a large number of patients. So for one particular subtype of LGMD, our goal was 150 patients, which struck me as a very ambitious goal, but in fact we exceeded that. We have 14 clinical centers in various countries around the world. We've actually had to turn away patients. There were more patients who wanted to participate, so many patients, by and large, really want to contribute and pitch in, so the more people you make friends with via social media, bring into the community and work together, that's very important. Another example, one of the researchers that's funded by the Jain Foundation entered a contest sponsored by a biotech company which offers free services to projects depending on who gets the most votes on a web-based voting. Each person can vote one time, but it doesn't cost anything. So the voting went on for about 3 months. About 2 weeks before the end of the program, this particular project was in 10th place. Then we made some announcements on various Facebook pages, including the Speak Foundation, so thank you for Catherine for permission for that. And by the power of social media, it moved from 10th place to 1st place. So, and that's thanks to all of you and all of the other people who voted. So people really want to support. You just need to get them involved and get involved yourself. Okay, now the other thing that we want to achieve, apart from diagnosis and research, is we want treatments and eventually cures. And the way that the system is set up, you need to have a drug company develop a treatment. It needs to undergo a clinical trial, be approved by the FDA before it can be given to patients. That's the system we have in place. So it's worth going over some of the mindset of drug companies. They've discovered in recent years that we have lots of drugs for cholesterol, acid reflux, and a bunch of common things. And it's hard to make much money introducing yet another drug for the same disease. And they've come to realize that developing drugs for rare diseases can be a very good business proposition for them. One example is Myozyme, which was developed by the company Genzyme for Pompe disease, which is a neuromuscular disease. And it really convinced people, look, if we can develop drugs for neuromuscular disease, that can be very good for us. Okay, but what do they need to be interested in a particular neuromuscular disease? They want to know, is there some organization of patients or family members so that they can get in touch with the patients? Is there a registry of patients with the disease so they can be contacted for clinical trials? How many patients are there in the registry? These are the first questions that drug companies ask. And in the case of a genetic disease, are the patients genetically diagnosed? Which goes back to Madhuri's presentation, the importance of genetic diagnosis. Then they need patients to participate in clinical studies and clinical trials. And before they're ready to do a clinical trial, they need to know the natural history of the disease, what the symptoms are, what the progressions are, what you're going to look for to tell if the treatment works, and to have the infrastructure in place, having doctors, nurses, physical therapists who are set up and experienced for conducting a clinical trial. So that's one of the things that is achieved by doing a natural history study. It not only tells us about the disease, it also trains the people who are going to be conducting the clinical trial to get organized, particularly if it's a multi-center international clinical trial. Okay, so back to the first thing. The first thing I said was, get diagnosed. Okay, well, of course, that's easier said than done. Some of you may have had encounters like this with a neurologist. Well, my neurologist just said I had LGMD. You mean there's different types of LGMD? What is mine? Or the neurologist said, well, there's no treatment, so there's not really any point in genetically diagnosing you because there's nothing we can do about it anyway. Okay, but you either need to start with a chicken or an egg. There aren't going to be treatments until enough patients have been diagnosed who can participate in clinical trials to get people interested in developing a treatment and to get a treatment tested and approved. So the announcement that I have is that we have teamed up with Madhuri's lab to offer a new testing initiative in LGMDs and related, meaning clinically similar neuromuscular diseases. Now, those of you who were at the conference last year remember that I did a demo of the ALDA tool, which predicts, based on your symptoms, which specific genetic type of LGMD you're likely to have, so you can test that gene. But with the next generation sequencing that Madhuri just outlined, we don't have to know that. We just have to have a relatively high likelihood that you have some form of LGMD or something similar. Okay, these are some screenshots of the website that is going to be, that the patients will go to offer this testing. The site will be lgmd.org, but don't go to that site yet. Right now it redirects you to the Coalition to Cure Calpain, which reserved the domain. So we're setting up the site. It'll be online within the next couple of months. So you take a quiz which gives the likelihood that your symptoms are consistent with a neuromuscular disease, including LGMD. And then there's approximately 35 different genes that are sequenced via the next generation approach. Okay, now who is behind this? The Jain Foundation is participating, but so are the Coalition to Cure Calpain 3, which focuses on LGMD2A, the Kurt plus Peter Foundation, which is 2C, the 2D Foundation, the 2I Fund, the Cecil Day family, and I mention them because they're the people who funded the project which initially discovered the dysferlin gene. In addition, we're negotiating with Genzyme to get support from them because Pompe disease, for which they have a treatment, is one of the diseases that's on the list. So you go to the site, you register, you take a quiz. If the quiz says that you have a high likelihood of having LGMD or something similar, you're approved for testing, which means you don't have to worry about insurance. These organizations will pay for the testing. So insurance, no problem. Initially, it's for patients in the US, but as things progress, we plan to expand it internationally as well. Then there's a connection to the disease registries for 2A, 2B, 2I, 2C, 2D, et cetera, as well as a general LGMD registry for subtypes that don't have a specific registry. And I'll just mention that if you have a disease that doesn't have its own foundation, 2A, 2B, et cetera, have one because someone started it. So someone needs to start it. Why not you? So to summarize, we've put this in an acronym, RECAPS. Reach out to other patients, which you're doing by coming here this weekend. Enroll in foundations in your particular disease. Create a community. Social media works great. Get a specific genetic diagnosis if indeed you have a genetic disease. Participate in join registries and participate in studies and in clinical trials, and spread awareness about this disease. As we heard in the presentation last night about advocacy in the political arena, there really is strength in numbers, even more so. Drug companies look at numbers. The more people patients there are registered in a registry or joining a advocacy organization, the more they look on that. And this is another point that I got at a orphan drug conference that I attended with some coworkers from the Jain Foundation in Washington a few months ago. They don't look on patients as guinea pigs, drug companies. They look on us as partners. They can't develop a drug without us helping them. We can't develop a drug without their expertise. We need to work together. So thank you very much.